I think that, first of all, I'm a firm believer that dads are super important in children's lives. And I think that the way that you're a superhero as a dad is that you're present, right? That you're present. You're bringing something unique to the table that a mom can't bring. I'm a very big believer in a mom and a dad in a home and the importance of that, because women and men are fundamentally different. We each bring different things to the table, and the child learns very different lessons from each of us. Even if you look at my kid goes and plays soccer, I'm there, my husband's there. We're there together at every single soccer game for this little guy. He loves it. He looks for mom. He looks for dad. He looks at us for different things. I'm always running after him, making sure he's got his water, making sure he's not too hot, putting the hat on. Jeremy's there cheering him down. Come on, you go get that goal. It's just so different, but it's so, so important to be present. So, and I think Tate is going to change his mind about this when he becomes a dad.
I think so too. And I've done when I was doing work with, when Pat Campbell was still alive, we used to have these conversations about like parenting, like how important a father. Usually it was like around like Father's Day.
Yeah.
Right. And because everybody hates their dad. Like he was a son of a bitch. I don't ever want to be like him. And it's like Father's Day is just like the message is always do better. Right. That's all it comes down to. And the reason why that's popular right now is because we have this notion that guys, like men, like fathers in general, are either Homer Simpson or they're the abusive guy who left mom. He was right. The guy. You got two choices, really. You've got the doofy dad, or who tells dad jokes and farts now and then, or else you've got the guy who's like the borderline abuser. I never want to be like my dad. Or why do we say that like strippers have daddy issues, right? So it's always this sort of negative connotation word more in thinking about fathers. And this really kind of harkens back to how we've kind of destroyed masculinity in general, or confused it. And as a result, we've demonized like men in general, but we demonize fathers in specific here, because what we've done is we've made fathers superfluous. So when we talk about like, we need fathers in the household. That's great, but they don't really get into specifics about it. They never want to talk, well, he's him being there is all that's really necessary. In some cases that might be true. However, you can't tell guys to man up after generations of telling them to man down. So when we look at women, like say on Mother's Day, we think, oh, they're superheroes. They can do anything. I never needed a dad. My mom took care of it for me. She was just as much of a man. She could do anything. She's this androgynous thing. She's the best of both, of masculinity and femininity, and that's simply a false statement, because what it's meant to do is to keep kids in single parent homes is what it's meant to do. However, when that kid is into drugs, when that kid is a criminal, when that kid gets into is suicidal, then we say, where's dad? When that kid becomes a school shooter, where's dad? That's the responsibility, but you take away his authority because he's superfluous up until the point where the kid acts out and he does something that has a criminal act. And now we want to know where this kid's father is, because he's not living up to the expectations that we think he ought to have. So that's one aspect of it. And I do understand that the guys need to be in the household. They need to be fathers. They need to be. And I would also argue this is there's probably a lot more fathers in the household doing a lot more than anyone wants to give them credit for now, because as I said, it's easier to create bullshit than it is to refute bullshit. And I can also show you, like say in the Black community, there are a lot more fathers that are involved with their kids right now. They're just not married to the mothers. They're still involved. They still want to have their kids. They want to have custody. They want to be involved in their kids' lives. But because they're not married, we say they're absent because they're not married to the mother. No, they're still the father. But because the criteria is based on marriage, then we say, oh, well, it's a single parent household. And statistically speaking, if that's the definition, they're correct. So doesn't necessarily mean involvement, doesn't necessarily mean marriage, but I would hope it would, because you want to have that sort of, mom is there to provide the conventional feminine model, the model on which that kid understands femininity, and masculinity. That conventional model is provided by the father that is present in that household. Now, that's what I get into in my third book, which is Positive Masculinity. I go into great detail in parenting in there, because that's one of the questions that's thrown at me. Like, when should my kids read The Rational Male, Rollo? I don't want them to fall into the same pitfalls that I did. Well, I wrote a book about that so that, guys would have something to sort of like, to go, a roadmap at the very least to go by. Now, I'm going to throw everything under the bus now. Okay, here we go. I think this is from Claire Lehman, but she was doing this dissertation. Okay. How to be a parent in 2017. Okay. Well, in modern times, make sure your child's academic, emotional, psychological, mental, spiritual, physical, nutritional, and social needs are met while being careful not to overstimulate, understimulate, improperly medicate, helicopter, or neglect them in a screen-free, processed foods-free, GMO-free, negative energy-free, plastic-free, body-positive, socially conscious, egalitarian, but also authoritative, nurturing but fostering independence, gentle but not overly permissive, pesticide-free, two-story, multilingual home, preferably in a cul-de-sac with a backyard and 1.5 siblings spaced at least 2 years apart for proper development. Also, don't forget the coconut oil. Okay.
Organic.
That's how you do it in that
organic,
times.
Rolo. Coconut oil needs to be organic.
How to be a parent. How to be a parent in literally every other generation. Feed them sometimes. Mm-hmm. That's what he's kind of coming back to. Is like we're over, in some cases we're over parenting. Mm-hmm. So you have to take that in consideration as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but you would agree that having a dad there to fulfill that role of a dad is
model.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, it's interesting. Before I got into media, this crazy business, I think I mentioned this to you. I taught in schools. I was an advisor to students, 7th grade through high school. I was a high school dean, and I was involved in a lot of those conversations about behavioral issues that would manifest. 9 out of 10 times when there was an issue that would manifest with a kid, there was a problem at home. I can tell you 75% of the time it involved a parent that was absent too much, that a dad was away on business trips all the time, wasn't home, and we would eventually come to that conclusion that, whoa, this kid feels a certain type of way about what's going on in the house. I also feel like it's really important. You said, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be marriage. Of course, it would be ideal. Kids also, I think, benefit enormously from seeing mom and dad love each other.
Yes,
there's absolutely something really beautiful that happens in a child developmentally when they see, my kid will stop and stare and look sometimes when I give my husband a big hug, and he'll wrap his big bare arms around me. And there's a moment there, and I don't know what he's processing, but I know that it's good. I even came from a house where my dad worked. He was the breadwinner in the house. He worked. He got up really early. He got up, 5 a.m. every single day. He didn't get home till 7 p.m. But when he got home, we all ate dinner together. Those last 2 hours of the night he spent with me, whether it was doing homework or reading stories. He was at every track meet. He was at every, he loved basketball, and I was a cheerleader. So he came to support. Like, he was very present. And I always say my dad made me tough and my mom made me compassionate, and it turned me into a little firecracker. So this is important. Yeah. I do have a graph to show the audience too as well. Tyler, if you can just bring that up at the end. I just want the audience, there's a lot of guys listening to this who are dads.
Stats for you too, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear that. This is from the National Fatherhood Initiative, and it just shows, we covered on Father's Day, we did a whole episode on dads, but it just shows the father absence crisis in America. 18.4 million children, 1 in 4 without a biological step or adoptive father at home. Look at the risk. Four times greater risk of poverty, more likely to have behavioral problems, 2 times greater risk of infant mortality, more likely to go to prison, more likely to commit crime, 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen, more likely to face abuse and neglect, more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol, obesity risk. And a lot of times in those conversations, when I was functioning in a school in an administrative role, a lot of times absent didn't mean they didn't exist. It meant that they weren't present enough. So just take that into account, people who are absorbing information like this. I do think Andrew will change his mind on this when he becomes a dad. I think some things about parenting you don't really understand until you're in it. I myself made a lot of judgments prior and then got in it and was like, oh, wait, this is different. So it is a learning experience. You have to give people a little bit of room on that to become parents themselves and learn. But I would love to hear your story.
So I have if anybody wants any more like data on this, a really good book is by Dr. Warren Farrell. It's called The Boy Crisis, and a lot of these stats are drawn from that. 63% of suicides nationwide are individuals from single parent families. 75 and usually meaning because mom gets the custody. So let's be honest here. But they hedge their bets here with single parents. 75% of children in chemical dependence hospitals are from single parents. More than half of all youths incarcerated in the U.S. lived in one-parent families as a child. 63% of youth suicides are from single-parent families. 90% of all homeless and runaway children 85% of children that exhibit behavioral disorders. I think you already mentioned that. 80% of rapists motivated with displaced anger, single parent households.
Yep.
71% of high school dropouts, 75% of adolescent patients in chemical abuse centers, 70% of juveniles in state operated institutions, and 85% of all youths sitting in prisons today are the result or the products of single parent families right now.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some pretty damning statistics right there. Is it just the man's presence, or is it his influence that is important in that? Because if you read the Boy Crisis by Dr. Warren Farrell, men tend to, as single parents, men tend to have much lower incidence of all of that. So when it's a female, when it is the mother that is the one who is charged with bringing that child up for whatever reason, so we can go for the data points and make the correlations there. But men tend to, like single fathers tend to raise better children than single mothers right now. And that may simply be because it's so rare for men to be the actual single father. It's usually because he was widowed when that happens.
Right.
So, or he's a widower, right? So we have to look at the statistics and what goes along with that. But again, I always hear, and particularly in the Black community, I hear people say, well, we need more fathers in the Black community, and they need to really take their responsibility. It comes down to this personal responsibility messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why we say that it's not that we don't have fathers in those communities, it's that they're not married to mom. And that's how we track statistics, through marriage rates rather than through actually the involvement of the father in that kid's life at that time. So we have to actually look at that. We have to modernize our way of like deciding what's an involvement, are there fathers in the household, whether they're married or they're not. We need to sort of reform the statistics for that. But also when we're talking about responsibility, and we're talking about responsibility and authority, if you put a man in the house and the man is the father of the house, and he's the one who's the disciplinarian, like you said, you got your toughness from your dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because your dad at some point along the way says, I have the authority because I'm the man in the house, and this is what's expected of me. If there's going to be punishment due, I'm the one that's going to do it. You're going to look at me you're going to respect my authority as a man. I think today, whether it's in society at large, or it's in the family or wherever else, men still are tasked with that responsibility. Where's the dad? How come this kid's a criminal? It's dad's fault. He should have been there. He should have been the one that was disciplining this kid to turn this kid into a better child. But at the same time, we're getting the same message saying mom can do it all. Women are our superheroes, right? Until there's a bad result, until there's something that's antisocial that comes along with that. And that shines a light on what I've always talked about. I think I talked about it the last time with you, is responsibility versus authority. Mm-hmm. So even if that guy is even if there's a father in the house, how involved is that father? And then second of all, does that father actually own up or have the authority to be the one who's going to turn you into a tough kid, turn you into a tough individual? Because right now, I would say that most guys don't even aspire to that authority. They think in terms of egalitarianism. They think in terms of who's going to be the dominant masculine versus the deferential, submissive, feminine side of things. You said you learned your nurturing from your mom, and you learned your toughness from your dad. That's because he assumed that role and your mom assumed the other role. Mm-hmm. So right now, if we're going to talk about egalitarian, we're living in equal partnership, whatever. If that's the dynamic in the family, that's what the kids are going to learn. It's not going to be toughness from dad. It could be toughness from mom. It could be toughness from the people that they're in high school with. If it's even Steven, then you don't have the conventional masculine role that is the influence on that child, and you don't have the conventional feminine role that's in there that creates a well-balanced individual. So just staying together, yes, it's important that parents stay together, but it's also important, as you were saying before, is that there is a genuine love and affection between those two. And I'll leave you with this. Is my personal, here's an anecdote for you, is it didn't hit me until my daughter became like 18 or 20 or something. And she looks at my wife and I, and she says, I really want to have what you guys have, because you guys really genuinely love each other, because she's hanging out with friends whose parents are split, or they hate each other, or there's some sort of conflict and friction between them. And it took her to become an adult to appreciate it. Mm-hmm. But like once she goes and she says, wow, my friends' families are pretty, dysfunctional, but you guys seem to have been made to make this work. I'm like, yes, because I have authority. I'm the positive, dominant masculine in the marriage. And she is the positive, nurturing, wise old feminine in the marriage as well. So eventually your kids will appreciate that, because they'll see that it's a rarity in today's society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's oftentimes what gets confused, and how sometimes, I wind up, even you and I sometimes would talk over each other. I use the word partnership. But when I use that word partnership, because that is what my marriage is a partnership. When I say that, though, I don't mean that we are each playing similar roles. I mean that we're both invested in each other and invested in the family and invested in our child, but we're different. My husband is the disciplinarian. He's better at it.
And why not call it a marriage instead of a partnership?
It is a marriage. No, 100%. But I use the word partnership as opposed to, I just use that a lot to refer to the fact that we're both equally invested in each other and the child. And I think that confuses
refer
people
to themselves as
partnerships as well.
partners.
Yeah. Well, it's a marriage. I mean, he's my husband. I use the word husband all the time too. But I guess what I'm getting at is, on your one point, when I say a dad needs to be present, I don't mean he just needs to be there. I mean, he needs to be invested, to clarify. Also, it's impossible for a woman to do it all, because you can't do those things that a guy does in the same way that he can, in the same way that a guy can't do those things that you do in the same way that you can. So it's very hard in these, if you have single moms or single dads, it's very hard for them to replicate the dynamic of a family. Now, of course, people find them in unfortunate circumstances. People pass away, horrible things happen. I understand that. And people make the best of those circumstances, and they bring in aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas, and people you can bring in an uncle that has, that masculine role and that more traditional way of, handling the house. There's a lot of things that can happen. Not everything is going to be ideal, but in an ideal situation, I do believe that it is a mom and a dad. And there's a reason for that, because they do bring drastically different things to the table. In my house, actually, just to the reason my dad really made me tough was because my mom, she'll hate that I say this. Sorry, Mom, I love you. But she was afraid of a lot of silly things. She was afraid of elevators, and she was afraid of roller coasters. And my dad was like, nope. You're going to get in that elevator. And now I get on the first seat of the roller coaster. I get in the elevator at Disney World. I'm the most daredevil girl you'll ever meet. But I was really grateful for that. And I always think about my life. And I think if either one of them hadn't been there, I would have been missing such an enormous, important chunk of what made me me, because she gave me so much empathy. So I can sit and have a conversation with someone who's been through something and really relate to where they're coming from. And he gave me so much toughness that I can sit, and if somebody's giving me a hard time, I'm gonna give it right back. So it's really a complete picture. And I think that's what makes a family really wonderful and beautiful and special.
That's the innate masculine and the innate feminine, right? So women tend to be risk averse. Men tend to be risk tolerant.
I'm definitely not risk averse.
Walk on the safe side of the sidewalk, Jedediah. Don't take risks. Be agreeable and be go along and get along. Give everybody. That's one thing, and then the others is be a risk taker. Accept the challenge. You need the balance between those two. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, is we are innately complements to one another. My weaknesses are offset by my wife's strengths, and vice versa. Her weaknesses are offset by my strengths. And that's not personality wise. No, there are innate aspects of me being biologically male versus her being biologically female that offset one another. And if you don't believe me, I can show you the fMRI's eye scans of how our brains are wired differently. And when you lay them on top of each other, they look like innate natural complements.